Hello, fancy folks. Welcome back to another episode of LuxeSci, a podcast to reignite your wonder by exploring the intersection of science and luxury. I'm your host, Dr. Lex, former parasitologist, current global health enthusiast, and eternal lover of all things fancy. This week, we're delving into another natural and controversial fabric, leather. I am sure that most of us have had a leather belt or shoes or bag at some point. It is a ubiquitous fabric that is prized for its strength, durability, and versatility. But where does it come from? What is it exactly? How is it made? And what new research is being done on and with leather? Let's find out together. Leather is one of the oldest fabrics. Long before the practice of tanning was invented, humans were using animal skins as coverings. The challenge was that the skins would dry and crack in the cold and rot in the sun. There's archaeological evidence from Huxley, England, that suggests humans as far back as 400,000 years ago were using animal hides for protection. Archaeologists theorize that bone owls dating back to 82,000 BC from South Africa were used as tools to create holes in leather hides. Evidence of leather tanning can be found in what is now Iraq, dating back to 5000 BC. The ancient Egyptians were proficient leather tanners, suggesting that the technique had been around for a while and they were perfecting it. Early leather tanning involved smoke, grease, animal brains, and bark extracts. The ancient world moved then to vegetable tanning, using tannins from tree bark, and the process was rather labor-intensive. There were some downsides to this tanning, though. Vegetable tanned leather is not water-stable. If you soak it and then dry it, it shrinks, which is actually advantageous for shoemaking. If this type of leather is boiled, it will shrink a lot and partly congeal, becoming very rigid and eventually brittle. This, however, makes for good armor and bookbinding. In fact, this type of vegetable tanned leather is the only type that will survive burial in wet environments. And this is important because archaeologists use leather materials to help establish information about ancient societies. I know that we're in the background section, but I'm going to pause here to share some research because I'm a huge nerd and I love citing some research. One group out of Teesside University in England and Western University in Canada set out to study how archaeological leathers degrade. They used a technique called Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. This technique is already widely used by archaeologists to study organic preservation in artifacts, like screening for collagen in bone, and it is used specifically to look at leather to assess damage. The technique uses infrared light to scan samples and observe chemical properties in those samples. The research group used experimentally buried leather to mimic leather found at a Viking site in England. They used a different type of tannins to vegetable tan leather and buried it in laboratory-based wet soil environments. The samples were excavated at various time points up to 8 months out from the burial. Modern vegetable tanned leather samples were compared to archaeological samples that were excavated from the Vindolanda site in England. They found that the filter analysis was not substantially different between the experimentally buried leather and the archaeological leather, suggesting that the experimental burials could be used for models for further research. And what was most interesting to me was they found a rapid detanning of the leather upon burial, and that the detanning was not detrimental and actually might be necessary to the preservation of the leather in these wet soil samples. And it's interesting because for thousands and thousands of years, humans have been tanning leather to preserve it against environmental impacts. However, the detanning is the process that allowed for this leather to be preserved in the soil samples for archaeologists to find. Back to the background. The 19th century saw a shift to chromium tanning, which is still used today. Leather is still a very popular commodity. An average of 24 billion square feet are produced annually, with China and India as the largest producers. The global market for leather goods was $444 billion US dollars in 2022. North America was the largest consumer market. Genuine leather had the largest market share, although synthetic leather is projected to grow substantially. Footwear made up the largest segment of the market at 44%. Cow hides are the most frequently used to make leather. In the US, no cows are killed just to make leather. The hides are taken as byproducts of the food production industry. So what exactly is leather? Leather is the dermal layer of skin from an animal, usually cows, goats, pigs, or sheep, again, usually as byproducts of the meat industry. Mammalian skin is made up of two primary layers. I'm going to pause here for a really fun trivia fact. This is a good one to try to stump your friends with. What is the largest organ in your body? And the answer to that is your skin. Your skin is made up of the epidermis, which is a thin outer layer that doesn't have any blood vessels, so it's non-vascularized, and its role is protection. The epidermis consists of flattened keratinocytes that slowly die off and shed. A keratinocyte is a cell that produces keratin. Very creative naming. Keratin are sulfur-containing fibrous proteins that are insoluble and resistant to degradation. They form filaments that assemble to provide structural support for hair, nails, horns, claws, hooves, quills, scales, feathers, and the epidermal layer of our skin. So quite a variety of structures. One cool thing about keratinocytes is that they proliferate or grow in the basal layer of the skin, and as they move up, they flatten and eventually anucleate. The epidermis is coated with lipids and organic salts for antifungal and antibacterial purposes. There are also some immune cells lingering around in the epidermis to identify and destroy pathogens and to alert other immune cells in your body that something might be going on. The basement membrane is not technically a layer of the skin, but I liked the name, so I thought I'd put it in here. It's a thin layer of fiber between the epidermis and the dermis that regulates traffic between the two, kind of like a row of toll booths. And then there's the dermis, which is a vascularized layer of skin. It contains blood vessels that cushions the body from stress and strain and provides tensile strength and elasticity to the skin. There's a lot going on in the dermis. It's much thicker than your epidermis and contains nerve endings to provide a sense of touch, hair follicles, sweat glands, sebaceous or oil glands, lymphatic vessels, and blood vessels. The subcutaneous layer is not technically part of the skin. It's below the dermis, and its purpose is to attach the skin to the underlying bone and muscle and provide the skin with blood vessels and nerves. It contains 50% body fat for padding and insulation for the body. Okay, after that mini anatomy lesson about the skin, what about the leather? Essentially, leather is the treated dermal layer of the animal skin. There are two layers of the dermis, the papillary dermis and the reticular region. In leather making, the papillary dermis is called the grain layer, and the reticular region is the fiber network layer. The collagen, which makes up 80 to 85% of the dermis by dry weight, imparts the grain characteristic to the leather. This is a characteristic pattern of the skin, so think how cow leather and crocodile leather patterns are very different. So how do you make leather? It's a 3-stage process: pre-tanning, tanning, and finishing. And while the whole process is quite detailed, but there is a great summary from a mini article from the 1980s written by a medical student from Bristol University. The pre-tanning stage is the removal of the skin from the animal and preserving, softening, and preparation for the tanning. The unwanted subcutaneous fat, hair, and epidermis are removed by chemical or mechanical methods. The fibrous network in the dermis has to be exposed so that the tanning chemicals can act on it. The use of enzymes in this step is very helpful. Enzymes are proteins that help speed up chemical reactions. Think laundry detergent. These enzymes penetrate the skin's matrix and facilitate the removal of salts, fats, oils, and dirt. There are lots of different types of tanning that lead to different qualities in the leather. I'm not going to go into all of them for this podcast, but here's the general idea behind them. Tanning increases the number of stable bonds between collagen molecules to strengthen the skin and resist bacterial breakdown and oxidation. It also increases the number of cross-links between natural and added oils to maintain suppleness. It fills the spaces between the collagen fibers to allow for the physical properties necessary to mold and tool the leather. It also includes ingredients that reduce the damage due to atmospheric pollutants, human sweat, and to inhibit bacterial growth. The most popular method today uses chromium sulfate. The chromium cross-links the collagen subunits, and the whole process increases the space between the protein chains. Vegetable tanning uses tannins found in barks and leaves. The tannins also bind to the collagen proteins and coat them, which leads them to be less water-soluble and more resistant to bacterial attack. Additionally, the process makes the skin more flexible. Though this type of leather is not super flexible and tends to be used for luggage, furniture, footwear, belts, and other clothing accessories. There are various finishing processes to achieve the color, feel, grain, etc. that is required for a specific leather. These include shaving to get uniform thickness, dyeing for color, and brushing to polish the grain. The chemicals used in leather tanning, even vegetable tanning, can increase the chemical oxygen demand and total dissolved solids of water if they're not disposed of responsibly. Essentially what this means is that it decreases the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water, and it makes it more difficult for oxygen-dependent species to survive. Additionally, some processes can convert the chromium used in tanning into carcinogenic hexavalent chromium, which can be found in runoff and scraps that are consumed by animals. Another environmental concern around leather is the land use and emissions from the animal agriculture. Taking that into account, the Environmental Profit and Loss Statement in 2018 claimed that vegan leather production emissions can be up to a third lower than real leather. And while that sounds great, and it is, it might be a case when looking at the totality of the animal agriculture industry, but it doesn't have the fine detail. If the leather made in the US is from cows used for meat, is the issue the leather or the meat consumption? Additionally, one of the main components of vegan leathers are plastics, specifically polyurethane and polyvinyl chloride. With an estimated 13 million tons of synthetic fibers entering the oceans each year, this presents a real environmental threat. There were more than 5.25 trillion macro and microplastic pieces in the oceans in 2023. That's equivalent to 46,000 pieces per square mile. Now, both vegan leather and real leather can be more sustainable. Vegan leather can be made from plant-based materials, and real leather can be treated in ways that don't dump harmful chemicals into wastewater. Again, for me, when thinking about the environmental impact of any given process or fabric, the key for me is always not necessarily the process, which you absolutely should address, but also what are the drivers for that consumption. And in this case, it's really our fast fashion addiction. We are really addicted to having clothing quickly and to having fast trends and turnaround. And I think that causes us to not pay as much attention to where and how our clothing is manufactured, and to view clothing as disposable and not something that's supposed to last a long time. So that's my soapbox, and I'll get off it now and get back to the science. I have 2 more research articles on making leather more sustainable. The first one is from research out of the Kyiv National University of Technology and Design in Ukraine and the University of Antwerp in Belgium. Now, collagen for the pharmaceutical, biomedical, and cosmetic industries is usually derived from fresh animal tissues. I'm sure most of us women out there have something in our beauty product repertoire that says it has collagen in it. As you can imagine, this is not very sustainable if you're looking for fresh animal tissue each time. There is now a renewed interest in recycling waste streams, getting collagen from waste material, and that includes the non-tanned leather waste. The research team took leather waste from various steps before the tanning process and used acetic acid and salt to obtain collagen protein extracts from the waste material. In order to test the quality of the collagen, they formed it into gels and tried to grow HEC293 cells on it. And these are cells that are derived from human embryonic kidney cells. They're used in a wide range of cellular biology research and to produce therapeutic proteins and to safety test a variety of chemicals, and the growth requires collagen and is usually bovine collagen in its growth media. The researchers found that the collagen gel that they produced worked at least as well as traditional bovine collagen for supporting cell growth. This indicates that this type of collagen derivation would work well for more commercial indications, such as use in the medical and cosmetic industries. Lastly, and probably my most favorite, is making vegan leather out of mushrooms. Mushrooms are the fleshy fruiting body of a fungus, and the mycelium is the root-like structure of a fungus. Mycelium is lightweight and biodegradable and can be grown from waste sources. It has a relatively high strength-to-weight ratio. There seem to be a number of applications for this remarkable biological material, including acoustic insulation. One research group out of Korea sought to make a mycelium-based leather from a variety of Polyporales fungi. Polyporales is an order of fungi that contains about 18,000 species. Most of them rot wood, biodegrade wood, for their energy sources. Some are food and/or are used in traditional Chinese medicine. The team grew the fungi in the lab, harvested it, and turned it into leather by soaking the mycelium in glycerol, ethylene glycol, and polyethylene glycol, and then using tannic acid to cure it. They cut samples from the mycelium mat leather to test for different properties. The team found that the F. fraxinea fungus was the most suitable strain for mushroom leather production, and that using cheesecloth with a 20% polyethylene glycol and a hot press was a method that made leather with a high tensile strength. The team did recommend strain hybridization to improve the mushroom leather's performance. And even though this is a research paper, there are already a few companies making mushroom-based leather, including MycoWorks, as featured in the New York Times, and Milo Unleather. So we have discussed some historical background to leather. We did a lovely background anatomy lesson on skin layers and learned how to make leather, what is it, and some important environmental implications of both the leather and vegan leather industries. And lastly, learned a little bit about how mushrooms can be made into leather. So our glossary for today: vascularized is with blood vessels, non-vascularized is without blood vessels. Keratinocytes are flattened skin cells in the epidermis that produce keratin, and enzymes are proteins that speed up chemical reactions. And now for the cocktail party facts. First, most vegan leather is made from plastics. As anybody who ever went clubbing in the late 90s, early 2000s and wore pleather pants can attest to. The ancient Egyptians are credited with perfecting the vegetable tanning of leather. And lastly, you can absolutely use mushrooms to make leather. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into leather. Personally, I learned a ton about the process, the pitfalls, and of course, mushroom leather. Never not going to be cool. LuxeSci is a production of Erevna Media, produced by me, Dr. Lux. Audio engineering by Dr. Dimos, and our theme music is Harlequin Mood by Burdy. We're all over social media at LuxeSci Pod, and on LinkedIn as Erevna Media. Please do drop us a line and say hi. We love to hear from you. One final request. We're super close to having 2,000 downloads to the podcast, so please do share us with family and friends. Subscribe, rate and review, and definitely listen, because every listen helps. Until next time. And now for a little snippet of a podcast that we're really enjoying, and we hope you enjoy it too.
Strange by Nature, your guide to the strange, weird, unbelievable, and improbable wonders of the natural world.
They make the sound by vigorously rubbing their penis on their abdomen.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Then at night, they come out and crawl around your face and mate with each other.
Oh.
But
Sorry,
get this.
I would like to sleep tonight. As naturalists, let's face it, we find something dead, we go and we poke it with a stick. I did that with the deer like 3 weeks ago.
As you do. Rachel, no. You weren't paying attention. Blood and mucus.
Oh, right. Sorry.
All right, this episode is going off the rails.
This is the quality content people come here for. Strange by Nature podcast was chosen as one of the best science podcasts of 2021. Come join the fun wherever you find your podcasts.